Life's path is rarely predictable, and unforeseen circumstances force people to prepare for the most diverse challenges. But can a person prepare themselves for an encounter with absolute madness when their very existence is at stake? Some actually manage to do so. On December 21, 1988, in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, Amy Lord was born. Her family later moved to Brockham, where the girl spent her childhood years. Amy grew up with two sisters, Kimberly and Carly. The three girls shared a sincere and friendly relationship. After graduating from high school in 2007, Amy decided to pursue higher education and enrolled at Bentley University. She was drawn to the humanities, business, and marketing technologies. Thanks to her sharp mind, the young woman demonstrated excellent academic results and earned her bachelor's degree in 2011, becoming a qualified marketing specialist. After receiving her diploma, the young woman decided to begin her professional career. With this goal in mind, Amy moved to the large city of Boston, Massachusetts. In her new location, she easily found work at a company where she spent the next 2 years as a digital marketing specialist. Life was going wonderfully. She had found a circle of like-minded friends and met Mike Castle, with whom she dreamed of starting a family. On July 23, 2013, at 5:38 a.m., 24-year-old Amy Lord was in the entrance lobby of a multi-story residential complex. The young woman lived in this building and had woken up earlier than usual, as she intended to meet with her friend and colleague Christina. The friends had arranged to meet at 6 a.m. to visit the fitness center together before the workday began, but Christina never saw Amy that morning. While waiting for her friend at the public transportation stop and not seeing her arrive, Christina went to the workout alone. She assumed that Amy had simply not heard her alarm and didn't want to disturb her with calls. Christina wasn't particularly worried, even though she knew about her friend's punctuality. The young woman was convinced that she would certainly see her at the office, as their workstations were located next to each other. However, after finishing her workout, Christina was surprised to find that Amy's desk was empty. This situation was now cause for concern. Knowing Amy's boyfriend Mike, Christina immediately contacted him, trying to clarify the situation. But Mike replied that he had no idea where she was. The young man was aware of the planned morning physical activity and assumed his girlfriend had gone to the gym, as he hadn't found her at home when he woke up that morning. For several hours, both Mike and Christina continuously tried to call Amy, but to no avail. Therefore, at 11:30 a.m., her friend notified the office management about the situation. Mike and Christina managed to call all of Amy's friends and acquaintances, but none had information about her whereabouts. The company's management decided to notify law enforcement and file a missing person report for their employee. Upon receiving the report, law enforcement immediately contacted the missing woman's parents. It turned out that the relatives had also not been in contact with their daughter. A meeting was arranged with the family at Amy's residence in South Boston to inspect the dwelling. The meeting took place at approximately 2 p.m. The investigators thoroughly examined the residence, looking for signs of physical confrontation, theft, or any criminal activity. However, nothing suspicious was found. All items remained in their usual places, the door locks were undamaged. It seemed as if Amy had simply dissolved into thin air. The young woman's relatives insisted that she had an orderly and stable life. She had no intention of taking unexpected trips and couldn't just disappear without notifying her loved ones. The family insisted that something bad had happened to Amy. In the building's entrance area, contact lenses were found. The missing woman used such lenses. Additionally, marks from mechanical impact were noticed on the wall. These findings indeed looked alarming. Seeking to gather additional information about the missing woman, investigators questioned the parents in detail. They reported that their daughter drove a black SUV, specifically a Jeep Cherokee model. After receiving this information, one of the investigators recalled that at 8:30 a.m. that same morning, a fire had been reported on the outskirts in the southern sector of Boston. At the scene, they had found an SUV completely engulfed in flames. After firefighters arrived, the flames were extinguished, and the vehicle was evacuated for examination. By external appearance, the vehicle resembled the young woman's car. At that time, Amy was not yet formally considered missing. The license plates had been completely destroyed by the fire, but experts were able to establish the VIN number of the burned vehicle. It was confirmed that the car indeed belonged to Amy Lord. The investigators returned to the precinct and began analyzing information about the young woman. It was discovered that on that same morning, money had been withdrawn from her payment cards 5 times in various amounts, starting at 6 a.m. The withdrawals were made in small amounts through different ATMs, with approximately $1,000 withdrawn in total. The situation seemed puzzling. What was the point of withdrawing money multiple times in different areas of the city? The first transaction occurred not far from the young woman's residence. Arriving at the location, law enforcement discovered that video recording equipment was installed near the ATM. They gained access to the camera footage, hoping to see the missing woman on the morning recordings and clarify the circumstances of the event. Analyzing the video materials required significant time. Law enforcement continued to study recordings from all ATM machines where transactions were made with Amy's card. Additionally, they located cameras on the facades of adjacent buildings. All materials were systematized to form a complete picture of that morning. The investigators were still analyzing the collected data when, at approximately 4 p.m., a call came in from a chance witness. The man reported that during a bicycle ride in the forest area of Stonybrook Reservation in the Hyde Park area, he had stumbled upon the body of a young woman on one of the trails. Arriving at the indicated location, investigators found the deceased without clothing. More than 40 stab and slash wounds were counted on the body, primarily in the neck, face, and chest area. Fingerprint marks remained on the neck. The victim had been strangled. The body was found in a wooded area, remote from urban territory. Despite this, the perpetrator had not attempted to hide the body. No documents for identification were found with the deceased, but law enforcement recognized Amy Lord from available photographs. After official identification of the victim, the missing person case transformed into a criminal homicide investigation. Finally, the processing of all surveillance camera recordings located near the bank terminals was completed. The first recording of the young woman was dated 6:35 a.m. This was not the initial transaction, and Amy herself had carried it out. She approached the terminal in athletic wear, as if heading to or returning from a workout. At 6:47 a.m., she drove up to the next banking machine, located several blocks from the previous one. In these frames, they managed to capture her vehicle from the outside. Amy was again unharmed, arrived in athletic clothing, and personally conducted the cash withdrawal transaction. However, her actions seemed unusual. Law enforcement closely examined the car parked near the financial institution and noticed that the young woman was not in the driver's seat but was positioned in the passenger seat. Approximately 7 minutes later, the young woman appeared on video recordings again. The surveillance cameras captured her for a second time. In these frames, damage to her face became visible. Amy had an injured nose and several bruises. It became clear that she had been attacked and was likely a kidnapping victim. Despite the obvious danger, the young woman made no attempts to escape. Amy again obtained cash and returned to her vehicle, taking the passenger seat. Investigators traced the car's route through the city and managed to obtain additional recordings in which they attempted to identify the driver. The initial frame, where the young woman was positioned in the passenger seat while a third party was driving the car, was recorded at 6:10 a.m. This helped reconstruct the sequence of events. However, they could not identify the driver's face. During further analysis of the recordings, law enforcement discovered that the driver was concealing his face with an object resembling a t-shirt or special covering. He wore a cap on his head, but in one frame when he adjusted it, his completely shaved head became visible. It was important for investigators to establish the moment of the young woman's kidnapping. With this goal, they continued analyzing surveillance camera materials. This way, they managed to capture the moment Amy exited her residence. As soon as the doors opened, she was attacked. An unknown man was waiting near the entrance, nervously pacing back and forth. He forcibly pushed the young woman inside, where they remained behind closed doors for approximately 15 minutes. At 5:52 a.m., both individuals exited and headed toward Amy's car. This meant that the first cash withdrawal had already occurred under threat from the criminal. Such information allowed them to reconstruct the sequence of events. As soon as the young woman left her residence intending to visit the gym before work, she became a kidnapping victim. The perpetrator likely convinced her that he would release her after obtaining a sufficient sum of money. That's why Amy didn't resist and complied with his demands. After obtaining the necessary sum from her account, the young woman was taken outside the city limits, where she was subjected to an armed attack using a knife. After the murder, the body was left in a forest area, and the vehicle was destroyed by fire. Law enforcement never managed to obtain a clear image of the perpetrator's face. The deceased's loved ones were questioned, hoping to identify individuals who might have had ill intentions toward Amy Lord. However, no enemies were found. Amy's boyfriend had an ironclad alibi, which excluded him from the circle of suspects. His appearance did not match the person captured on the video recordings. To destroy the car by fire, the perpetrator needed fuel. The deceased's loved ones stated that she didn't have a habit of transporting fuel in a canister. In the frames from the beginning of the attack, no objects resembling a fuel container were visible on the perpetrator, so he must have purchased it at a gas station. To transport the body, he drove 10 kilometers to a suburban park area, then returned. Investigators analyzed all intersections with surveillance cameras that the perpetrator must have passed. The task was complicated by the fact that the young woman drove a common car model. There were hundreds, possibly even thousands, of black SUVs in the city. However, relatives provided an important detail: there was a distinctive sticker with a shamrock image on the rear window of the car. It was precisely thanks to this image that the vehicle was identified in traffic flow and the gas station where the perpetrator had stopped was established. Unfortunately, the surveillance camera at the gas station was non-functional. Investigators noticed that across the street was a liquor store with a camera on the building's facade. They managed to obtain video recordings from there, but the distance proved too great. Because of this, they couldn't clearly see the perpetrator's face. He arrived at the gas station around 8 a.m. without Amy. The car was identified thanks to the distinctive sticker. Although they couldn't make out the face, the driver of the vehicle waved friendly to someone and walked toward another person. The two exchanged a few phrases, shook hands, after which the perpetrator's acquaintance left. Fortunately, he passed closer to the liquor store's surveillance camera, which allowed for his identification. Law enforcement located this man and conducted an interview with him. He reported that at 8 a.m. near the gas station, he had met with his acquaintance, 28-year-old Edwin Alemany, who was driving a black SUV he hadn't seen him in before. In the past, he had worked as a busboy. At the time of the events, he was unemployed. It was discovered that early in the morning around 4 a.m. on July 23, 2013, the day of Amy's kidnapping, another South Boston resident named Alexandra Cruz had also become a victim of an attack. The young woman was heading to work at a Dunkin' Donuts coffee shop located in South Boston. As soon as she left her home, an unknown person attacked her in the parking lot, struck her in the jaw, causing Alexandra to briefly lose consciousness. After this, the attacker dragged her aside and began strangling her, but unexpectedly stopped. The unknown person expressed dissatisfaction that he had made a mistake and was looking for someone else. The perpetrator threatened to kill Alexandra if she screamed. The young woman begged to be left alone and spoke in Spanish, since the attacker looked Latino, and this tactic worked. His behavior immediately became less aggressive. The unknown person took her valuables and momentarily turned away. The young woman used this opportunity to escape. The perpetrator shouted after her that he would kill her if she went to the police, as he knew where she worked. However, the attack victim did not remain silent about the aggressor. Upon reaching her workplace, she immediately notified law enforcement. Approximately an hour later, a police representative arrived at the scene. She described the circumstances of the attack in detail, and based on her words, they were able to create a composite sketch of the perpetrator. He bore significant resemblance to Edwin Alemany's photograph. While the investigation was ongoing at Amy's residence, a new alarming report came into the police station. Around midnight in South Boston, an armed knife attack had occurred on a young woman. Investigators immediately noted that this crime had been committed near Amy Lord's residence. All of this gave grounds to believe they were dealing with a serial criminal, as there had already been 3 similar attacks on young women. Now it was necessary to respond to the new challenge. Officers had to immediately arrive at the scene of the new incident. After midnight, 21-year-old Kelly Ballantine became the attack victim. She was the only daughter in the family and was raised with 2 older brothers. This was likely why Kelly learned to defend herself. Her parents characterized their daughter as a fighter from early childhood. All the children in the family were physically developed, but the petite Kelly proved to be even stronger than her brothers. Back in 2003, when she turned 11, she had a tragic accident. A basketball hoop collapsed and fell on her head. For a month, the girl was in a comatose state and might not have survived, but later regained consciousness, recovered, and even continued playing hockey. When law enforcement met with the victim of the new attack, Kelly was injured but remained alive and was able to tell about the events of that evening. During this period, she was working and returning home around midnight. She was listening to music through headphones and didn't immediately realize the danger. Kelly had almost reached her residence when she noticed a suspicious person on the opposite side of the street. It was a burly man who seemed to be watching her. Later, he crossed to her side of the street, stopped, and observed her for about 5 seconds. Such behavior seemed suspicious, so Kelly quickened her pace. She quickly reached her apartment, but as soon as she inserted the key into the lock, the unknown person approached from behind and placed a knife blade to her throat. After opening the door, the attacker forcibly pushed her into the vestibule in front of the apartment doors. The young woman lost her balance and ended up on the floor, while the aggressor pressed down on her with his full body weight, positioning himself on top. Kelly pleadingly asked him to spare her life, offered to let him take any valuables, but without a word, he began stabbing with the knife. Kelly reflexively placed her left arm on her chest to protect vital organs, and began defending herself with her right. She also used her legs to deflect attacks. During the struggle, she managed to push away the attacker's arm, causing him to inflict a knife wound on himself and reduce the intensity of the attack. Sports activities were not just a hobby for the young woman, she was a professional athlete with strength and endurance, and was able to mobilize herself. This is what gave her the opportunity to save her life. After receiving the injury, the perpetrator moved back, losing his cap in the process, then got up and simply left the scene. Kelly got up after him and immediately locked the doors to prevent his return. The young woman didn't realize the number of wounds she had received or their severity, but after locking the doors, she fell to the floor, experiencing difficulty breathing. Fortunately, the key to the residence remained in her pocket, so she was able to unlock the doors and crawl inside. There she turned to her roommate. Kelly asked for paper towels to temporarily stop the bleeding. After this, she insisted on the need to contact her relatives, as she believed she might not survive the attack. Her friend acted decisively and first helped call emergency medical assistance. Then the roommate deemed it necessary to video record everything Kelly was saying. The young woman demonstrated remarkable calm despite the severity of her injuries, 2 knife wounds to the facial area and 2 to the neck. The total number of strikes was 7, one of which punctured her left lung, and another ended up a few centimeters from her heart. Later, they analyzed the location of the injuries received. Most of them were concentrated in the chest area. It became obvious that the perpetrator intended to kill the victim, as evidenced by the absence of attempts to take valuables. At that moment, police officers were less than a block away at Amy Lord's residence, continuing work on the morning incident. Thanks to this, they were able to arrive at Kelly's location within minutes. She immediately provided a description of the attacker, which almost exactly matched the man captured on camera in the morning and afternoon. Additionally, she confirmed the similarity to the composite sketch created from Alexandra's description. Law enforcement knew about the attacker's injury and immediately discovered a bloody trail leading from the apartment outside, so they decided to trace its direction. In parallel, detectives carefully examined the surrounding area searching for surveillance cameras to obtain an image of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the trail ended after 100 meters, but the detectives were lucky, a camera was installed on the nearest building. The data obtained from it allowed them to capture Kelly's attacker. The bleeding had stopped, he removed his white t-shirt and wrapped it around his injured arm. Thus, he exposed his upper body on the recording, which allowed several tattoos to be captured. Notably, after wrapping the wound with the t-shirt and stopping the bleeding, the perpetrator took out prayer beads and folded his hands in a position characteristic of prayer. To inform Kelly's parents, law enforcement called her mother and notified her of the attack. However, they couldn't provide specific information, as the young woman's condition remained uncertain. At the time of transport to the medical center, she was alive. At that time, the victim was in the emergency department, and her parents immediately headed there. The detectives also immediately arrived at the department as soon as they realized the perpetrator had managed to escape. They found Kelly while medical assistance was being provided. While the police officers waited for the opportunity to speak with the victim in more detail, a call came from the precinct. They reported that a Latino man with an arm injury had been admitted to the same medical center, claiming to be a victim of an unprovoked attack by a stranger on the street. In the room adjacent to Kelly's was a man with a deep knife wound that required stitches. During conversation with law enforcement, he introduced himself as Edwin Alemany. He matched the perpetrator's description, although he had partially changed his clothing. Enough time had passed before his arrival at the hospital for him to return home and change clothes. The detectives immediately began asking clarifying questions about the attack on him, creating psychological pressure on the likely perpetrator by asking about the attack on the young woman. Edwin replied that he had no idea about the events in Kelly's apartment, as he didn't remember anything. Using camera recordings, he was identified by his tattoos. After receiving first medical aid, he was detained for the attack on Kelly. Unfortunately, at that moment there was still insufficient evidence to establish the perpetrator's connection to Amy's murder, but the detectives quickly obtained a search warrant. In the suspect's residence, they found footwear and several items of clothing with blood traces, which were sent for laboratory analysis. After conducting expert analysis, they managed to establish that they belonged to him and the attack victims, Amy and Kelly. Additional checks revealed video recordings where Edwin used Amy Lord's funds. He purchased a new mobile phone worth $400, paid communication bills, and between attacks spent time at a Chinese restaurant in the company of his friends. He was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed carjacking, 2 counts of armed robbery, theft, vehicle arson, and a whole list of less serious offenses. According to Edwin's version, he had no connection to the attacks on the young women. He had spent the evening before the crime drinking alcohol with his brother and another friend, after which he lost consciousness. The brother testified that he transported the drunk Edwin to South Boston, who lost consciousness in the back seat. He had significantly exceeded the alcohol limit and possibly spent the entire next day coming to his senses. Edwin's girlfriend stated that that night they had a serious argument due to his state of intoxication, while their child slept in the next room. After the conflict, she left the residence with her daughter and returned after some time, seeing him leave the apartment shortly before midnight. Investigation of Edwin's criminal history revealed that he had previously been charged with attacks on women. These incidents occurred in Boston in September 2012 and July 2013. However, the investigation of these cases yielded no results. The reason Edwin Alemany continued to remain free lay in the negligence of the detective responsible for the investigation. He failed to assess the real level of danger that Edwin posed. This detective regularly committed violations in his service activities, as a result of which he received more than 10 complaints. An internal investigation was initiated, which resulted in his demotion to patrol officer, but not dismissal. Later it became obvious that his negligent performance of official duties allowed Edwin to avoid punishment, feel the absence of responsibility, and become more brazen. Amy Lord paid with her life for the detective's professional negligence. Fortunately, 2 other victims managed to survive. Although the third victim was on the edge between life and death, she was able to survive the attack and 10 knife wounds. Kelly required lengthy physical recovery and an even longer struggle with psychological consequences. The young woman awaited the opportunity to achieve justice and ensure the perpetrator's long-term imprisonment. The trial of Edwin Alemany began only in 2015. The process lasted 14 days, with the main prosecution witness being the survivor, Kelly. The young woman testified against the perpetrator, and throughout her testimony, she remained on the stand and stared piercingly at the killer. She demonstrated such inner strength that the defendant couldn't raise his gaze and look her in the eyes. The first victim, Alexandra Cruz, was also present during the court hearing and testified against the accused. The defense attorney tried to minimize the degree of violence and reported that his client had attempted suicide by tearing his veins with his bare hands, as a result of which scratches remained on his neck and arms. Based on the hearing results, Edwin was found guilty of first-degree murder of Amy, armed robbery and assault under aggravating circumstances, inflicting bodily harm using a deadly weapon, as well as attempted murder of Kelly Ballantine and Alexandra Cruz. He never admitted guilt and showed no signs of remorse. On June 19, 2015, Edwin received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of Amy Lord. He received 35 years for the attacks on Kelly and Alexandra. When Kelly was given the final word, she described in detail the difficulties of fighting to return to normal life. Her speech was so emotional that many present in the courtroom couldn't hold back tears. Amy's parents gave her their deceased daughter's earrings, because it was thanks to Kelly that they managed to stop the dangerous criminal. However, he never repented. In October 2020, Edwin filed a petition to federal court, claiming the ineffectiveness of his lawyers, who chose a defense strategy of insanity and admitted his guilt without his consent. At the same time, he considered himself not guilty. However, in 2021, the state Supreme Court upheld the original verdict. The convict found a new lawyer and together with him developed an alternative strategy, trying to achieve immediate release. The defense attorney referred to violations committed by the previous lawyer and the prosecution, but all these attempts proved fruitless. After recovering from her injuries, Kelly returned to her studies and completed her university education. She continued to live in Boston until the hearings in Edwin's case were completed. After this, Kelly decided to radically change her life and moved to California. Having lived in large cities for a long time, proximity to nature was supposed to help her cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. Gradually, she recovered from psychological trauma. She even regained the ability to dream, which became a small but significant victory. Throughout this entire period, she felt hatred toward Edwin for taking Amy's life and almost taking hers. Kelly couldn't understand what could drive a person to such senseless cruelty. Over time, the young woman began to feel more and more sympathy for the killer because of who he was. So she even wrote him a letter of forgiveness. But she couldn't send it. For 2 years, the letter was stored in her desk. Later Kelly tried to contact Edwin's lawyer. But she received no response. Later, she found herself in church at a sermon about forgiveness and again remembered the person who almost took her life. By coincidence, the pastor conducting the sermon visited the same prison where Edwin was held. So Kelly asked him to deliver the letter. 2 weeks later, she received a response. In the letter, Edwin Alemany described his difficult childhood, told about being born in Puerto Rico and moving to the USA without knowing English. There he had difficulties with employment and personal life. Edwin complained about bullying in childhood. Because of this, behavioral problems developed, and he spent his entire youth in correctional facilities for minors. At first, the young woman felt sympathy for him because of this response, but just a few weeks later learned about his intention to file an appeal and demand for release, citing his difficult childhood and life circumstances that broke him. Therefore, she became suspicious that Edwin had actually written all this to make a better impression and evoke sympathy. She could no longer trust him and stopped the correspondence. Fortunately, the appeal was rejected, and he continues to serve his assigned punishment. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.